folks. Welcome back to Mike and Maurice's Mind Escape. We have episode number 89 today, Lucid Dreaming and Tripping the Field, with our guest Ian Jaydid. And you can check us out on Patreon at patreon.com/Mike and Maurice for $2 a month. You'll get some exclusive content. As you can see, we have all of our other links right there, and I'll also have them below while we're streaming. What's going on, Ian? How are you?
Great. How are you guys doing? I'm wonderful. I'm in the Rocky Mountains, and we've got beautiful weather today, which is kind of strange because it's been snowing one day and then it's 80 degrees the next day. So I never know what to expect. So I'm trying to hold it together. I've been kind of wrestling with a bit of a cold, but I feel good today. I'm doing good. Thanks.
All right. So why don't you?
I was just up in the Rockies. Yeah, that's sweet.
Why don't you give us a little overview of what your book's about, how you got into writing it, what made you write it, that kind of thing?
Sure. So we'll go back. I mean, I started what's called lucid dreaming about at the age of 19. And this happened to me spontaneously. This was not something that I had read about. This was not something I'd even heard about. I'm 47 right now, so this was before the internet was really a thing. You know, we didn't really have the access to the kind of information that we have today, where you can just get on YouTube or you can get on Facebook or whatever. And I'm a member of many groups out there that help people develop these practices. But at the time, I had no idea what was happening. And just to be clear, when we talk about lucid dreaming, we're not talking about an intense dream. A lot of people, it's confusing. They're like, oh, well, I had a really lucid dream last night. And when they say that, they're generally saying that they mean that it was something that was very intense. It was something that was really, it impacted them. But
when they remember it pretty good too.
It's a clear memory, all that sort of thing. But when we talk about lucid dreaming, capital L, capital D, we're saying that you are 100% fully aware that you are dreaming at the time. Something happens either before the dream starts or during the dream where, for lack of a better term, you wake up, you become fully cognizant of, hold on, none of this stuff that's happening right now is real. None of this is actually happening. You know that you're asleep. You know that you're in bed. For me, I would even be aware of about like what time it was in the morning. I'm like, I know this, it's probably about, 5 in the morning, somewhere around there. I could even kind of tell what position my body was laying in, but I was fully submersed in the dream world. So this is important because when this happens, when you become aware of the nature of the reality that you're in, it's like a doorway opens. Something happens where you have access to a completely different realm of information. Some people call them parallel universes. Some people say that it's a doorway to astral projection. We can get into that. That was definitely my experience. It led into astral projection. I hate that term. I don't like that term. It sounds I don't like woo-woo, so to speak. I like to keep things very grounded as possible, and I like to understand exactly what's going on without a lot of spiritual or religious terminology. So these experiences started happening to me, like I said, this is some almost 30 years ago, somewhere around there. And the experiences became stranger and stranger. And this began happening to me every night, almost every night. And some of these experiences would go on for hours on end. And I would have to wake up in the morning and kind of deal with it, mentally, emotionally, and whatnot, and try to find information, research, whatever research I could find at the time. It was a matter of finding the right books. Again, not really an internet. I could just type lucid dreaming into and find 100 experienced experts on the topic like you can nowadays. So Years ago, I started writing a book. All of my experiences, it started developing into a story. Tripping the Field, which is the my first published book that deals with this topic. It is fiction, but it takes place in the lucid dreaming universe. And the idea of the book is that as you read it, you start learning how this universe operates. You start learning the rules of this new perspective of how the world works. And so, and it you kind of have to learn how this works so that you understand how the storyline plays out. And then so the book is the book is intended on it's intent on teaching you how to see things from this perspective, if that makes sense.
Yeah, actually, it does make pretty good sense. You say you're not into woo, but there's a lot of people that consider lucid
Oh
dreaming
yeah.
a little woo in the sense that we don't exactly even know what's going on with dreaming to
You
begin
don't.
with. We have an idea. There's a lot of materialist scientists that say, "Oh, it's just your brain on, um, it's like
Burning stuff, burning
yeah,
off the
burning
day
stuff,
or
yeah,
your
just working
thoughts
through
and stuff.
problems, like that kind of stuff." But
And they
uh,
are. Dreams are. Absolutely. You're absolutely right. Dreams, normal dreams are, I would agree with that 100%. I would say lucid dreaming is in an absolutely different category.
right.
So, but yes, in general, I would agree with that sentiment. Yes.
So
I wanted to ask you real quick, did
Sure.
you just start doing this all on your own, or did you actually study to do it? Because I know one of our buddies, he had to like vigorously condition himself to be able to do it.
Most people have to practice this for months or even years of doing what are often called reality checks. Yes,
Right.
that was
yeah,
not my
he
case. That
studies
was
Vedanta and Eastern philosophy and that kind of stuff.
right. And this in lucid dreaming, I that's some of the initial research I found in it because this was very much practiced in the Hindu and the Buddhist traditions. So I was able to pick up a lot of good practice and a lot of good practical information from that. Again, I'm always trying to pull out the dogma from what's practical and what's grounded that I can use. So yeah, this came to me spontaneously. It just started happening one morning. Specifically, I went into a dream state, whatever you call it. But all I can tell you is that when you go into a lucid dream state, it is 100 times more real than your waking life, and that probably doesn't sound like that makes a whole lot of sense, but it's one of those things that you have to be experienced. You have to have the experience, and then you go, okay, that's what that's like to have reality cranked up to 11, so to speak. But
Yes.
yeah, you like that. The
Yeah,
But
his
that's what happened. It just started happening. It just started happening to me. I would start entering these states, and I would just wake up, and I say that I started doing this at the age of 19, but and this is common apparently for a lot of lucid dreamers. I didn't realize until I started lucid dreaming that I remembered then that I was doing this back when I was like in middle school, or elementary school even. But those memories did not come back to me until much later, like after I had been involved in this. I was like, oh yes, that's right. I used to do this, but I forgot. I forgot it. And apparently that's, like I said, it's fairly common that a lot of us have done this when we were kids, but adult life, whatever it is, the world bowls you over, and you get caught into a certain kind of mindset of being a member of this society, and those memories sometimes get very much flushed aside. So, but it happened to me. Luckily, I was a lucky one. This stuff comes to me spontaneously. I don't need to do reality checks. Now, I say that, but let me be clear. I had to learn vigorous techniques that took me years to develop on how to focus myself once I was in the dream. So once I was awake and aware in a dream, then there are techniques that I had to employ. And there are very practical things that I dug up out of ancient shamanism, from the Toltecs, from ancient Mexico, people who had been practicing this stuff thousands of years ago. And that I found it really very practical. So, yeah, I was lucky. It came to me spontaneously.
yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I started meditating a few years ago, and after I started meditating, I realized what was going on. So every single day, I kind of have weird sleep patterns to begin with, but almost every single day, I'll go to bed kind of late at night, but then I'll wake up, go to the bathroom, come back, and I can either revisit the dream I was in, or I'll be able to create a new dream by jumping back into that realm. But it's pretty much instantly. It's weird because I feel like it takes a long time to get to the sleep or the dream aspect of sleep, but then when you're already in that mode, it seems like you can just jump right back in if you're already there. So
Yes, yeah,
that's my experience. But from learning how to meditate, that became easier. I don't know if it's
it
because
does.
the focus, or the your understanding when you're meditating kind of a little bit more about yourself and the way your mind works and that kind of stuff. But
I can
yeah,
tell you specifically why. I'll tell you exactly why meditation helps with these kind of practices. I would say that meditation at its core, the most important thing that you're doing with meditation is that you're detaching from your storyline. You're detaching from your inner dialogue. And if you think about it, that's kind of what a dream is. It is a storyline, it's a narrative that you get caught up into and you believe without question. I mean, think about the craziest dream that you've had recently, right?
right.
Just think about
Mhm.
the craziest thing. If you think about it, lucid dreaming makes more sense than what happens in our normal dreams. I mean, it's kind of strange that we don't ever at any point go, wait a minute, I'm not James Bond. Why am I being chased by a bunch of ninja, whatever the crazy scenario is. You never stop and go, this doesn't make any sense. But in lucid dreaming, you do. You have that you're able to have that pause. And to me, that's what you're developing in meditation. You're developing that ability to pause and go, hold on, what's going on? And you're able to look at your thoughts a little bit more from an objective standpoint, and you can wake up at that point. And like I said, once you wake up in a dream, strange things begin to happen. And so over the years, strange things definitely did begin to happen that very much forced me to question my version of reality.
Why do you? Well, let me ask you this actually.
Sure.
So when you're lucid dreaming, though, for me, this is just for me. I've noticed that um, it's not like you said. There's no fantasy type dream or dreams where you're an animal or something else. Maybe
Right.
like some people have. It's based on your reality and different things that have happened in your life recently. At least for me, and it's always from a first person point of view. I'm like a disembodied mind, if that makes sense.
Uh-huh.
So I never see my body or interact. It's almost like I said, kind of like when you meditate. You're in this dream type state, but you're still there and still present and still yourself.
Right. You're conscious. Yes.
Right. So if that's the case, what do you think the implications are for that as involving what, or like we always talk about the hard problem of consciousness on this podcast, and
Exactly.
we can't
Yes.
crack it, and
Nope.
scientists, even the best explanations are really not that great, and people that are pretty sure about other things like Sir Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff and those kind of guys still struggle to kind of understand what's going on, so
I mean, if you want me to speak on consciousness, I can give you over the years what I feel consciousness is,
yeah, just
and
how it relates to this
sure.
phenomenon. Yeah.
So, what it seems to me, and I'm going to fumble for words now because it's not an easy thing to describe because consciousness is not a thing, it is not an object, it's more of a wave. If we think about it in terms of physics, there's particles and waves. I'm not going to get too deep into quantum physics unless you guys want me to, but
I mean, we've done many
I
episodes on them,
yeah,
on quantum
I
physics and all that kind of
there's
stuff, but
I believe that there's a direct connection to quantum physics. There's a lot of lessons to be learned, and I think there's a lot that quantum physicists and lucid dreamers could share. I'm actually working on an article right
Yeah.
now for a lucid dreaming magazine that is trying to combine these two disciplines, these research practices. But when I think of consciousness, I think of it as the ground state of all forces. I see consciousness as the 0 point field, if you will. It is what every other field in existence is based on. Maybe we talk about electromagnetic fields, we talk about magnetic fields, we talk about the Higgs field, we talk about lots of different kinds of fields. I believe that it is the field of all fields, and there's only one of them. It is not divided. I believe it was never brought into existence. I think it's the base of the universe, for a lack of a better term. So the problem is that, again, we are caught up in these narratives, and we are creatures that are bound to storylines, and that is what our identities are caught up with. We all have identities, and an identity is really nothing more than a story that we have, a running story that we have. Well, I'm so and so, this is my name, this is how old I am, this is my job, yada yada yada. It's just a list of a story, and then if we can get beyond that and go back to the source, which is consciousness, again, I believe that you are tapping into then the source of everything, even the source of how the universe is constructed at the particle level. And I know that sounds pretty wild, but has been my experience. So that's why lucid dreaming is a doorway into all these very strange other areas. It took me a few years of lucid dreaming before I started proving to myself that I was able to move. Well, we talk about out of body experiences, and it's another phrase that I don't like. I don't see things as that there's something moving outside of the body. Again, in my idea of consciousness is that it is a field that is absolutely everywhere. I would say it would be the same thing as empty space in many ways, and perhaps the nature of emptiness is consciousness. I mean, that's one way to put it. So when you move beyond your identity, you move beyond the narrative of your dream, you move beyond the narrative of all of the narratives that you have running in your head, you can then drop the idea of the physical body, and you can move to other areas. They can be in this realm, they can be in other realms. But what I started doing after a while is I started visiting people that I knew, while I was asleep in bed, people who I'm, friends and family who were hundreds of miles away, and I was able to observe what they were doing, and then being the scientific minded person that I am, I would then call them later on the phone, and my friends and family, after a while, they got used to this. Like, all right, Ian's calling us, he's going to ask us some crazy question about what we were doing at 6 o'clock in the morning or whatever. And at the time, much to my dismay, they started relating stories back to me of exactly what I saw. And, I was able to see, the girl I was dating at the time, or my mother. I could go find friends of mine, and I could see exactly what they were doing. I could not write down to what they were wearing, what action they were performing, what they were watching on television. And that very much disturbed me. I didn't want to hear this. That was not something I was
kind of like
remote
viewing in a way.
That's so, yeah. And we're going to get caught up in terminology here. Remote viewing is generally happening. When they say remote viewing, they're usually awake. They're very much, They kind of go into a meditative state, right? And then they go and pick a spot, a location, and they come back with information. I would say that the term out-of-body experience or astral projection, it's a little bit more integrated than that, where you're able to take that part of your conscious identity and project it into a very specific spot. So you're basically standing there, essentially, where that other person is. It's not abstract as much. if that makes sense. And so that's one of the strange things that you can tap into with those practices. But like I said, I think anybody can do this. I don't think I'm special on any level. I believe that
Right.
you can practice this. In fact, I'll give you guys some tips, and for the audience as well, things that you can try this evening. Like when you go to sleep, there's things you could give a shot to.
Sure.
I'm taking a nap right after this. I'm getting right into it.
So your
Yeah.
idea of consciousness is actually kind of similar. We had a scientist on recently, Seth Kostek,
Okay.
who is, you know, quantum biologist or studies, quantum, you know,
Right up my alley.
yeah, he does that kind of stuff, but he has a theory on what's going on, and it's involved with, like, non-duality, kind of
Yes.
similar things that we're talking about. And
Yes.
what he was explaining is his theory, which, I mean, I've heard other variations of it, but his theory is that there's the only thing there is consciousness. There is, like what you're saying, there is no separation.
Right.
Everything we see and separate in our minds is just a mental construct, and then even language even further separates everything. So he, his idea is that we're in some sort of, not like a simulation, but like some sort of game. Like I'm God, you're, and when I say God, I don't mean like
I understand.
the bearded Zeus archetype in the sky. I mean, like we literally are a piece of this one massive thing for whatever reason that's living itself out through all these different, appendages or, variations, if you will.
Yes.
And it kind of
Yes.
makes sense if you think about it. If there was some conscious one mind, or, I think Eastern philosophy, talks a lot about that kind of stuff too. But if you are that, then you would want to play itself out in you would get bored with just one scenario or one thing. So you'd want to play itself out in many different ways. And that's kind of, if you think about
Yeah.
life, and even though, I'm a creative person, musician, we do this podcast and stuff like that, but you get bored with doing the same thing over and over. Let's say you write a song and you play that song constantly. Well, it's like, okay, time to write a new song. However, there's parts of that song that are influenced by other things. So there's always some precursor, and there's never truly a different thing. So if you think about it, everything comes from something, if that makes sense, I guess, is
Okay.
what I'm trying to say. But my whole point of this is it's similar to what you're saying, in the sense that the baseline of everything is consciousness, and that is all there is.
That's it. That's
And
it. Yeah. Right
we're
there.
we're living in an illusion, basically.
We are, and there's a way to, and we have the tools now. We have the information, in my opinion, if you're interested, to break out of that illusion. We've got a lot of things, and I think that people are becoming more and more fascinated with this topic. It seems to be a topic that is just exploding right now. When you get into not just lucid dreaming or astral projection or meditation practices, but also, psychedelics, DMT. Those are just, in my opinion, psychedelics, plant medicine, or it's another tool to get you to the same place that I'm talking about. I happen to be more, I have more of an expertise in lucid dreaming, but I've also done my share of psychedelics as well. And my book, Tripping the Field, focuses heavily on both of those. It's very heavily laden with psychedelics and lucid dreaming and whatnot. I think, like you said, it's all coming back to consciousness. It's the baseline. It's the baseline. And I do think that there is a connection in physics. Physicist Lawrence Krauss, who I've had some communication with, he's a theoretical physicist, and one of his last books was called A Universe from Nothing. I cannot say that I understood his book completely. I
Yeah,
am not a physicist.
we talk shit about him on here.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with his work. He's so pompous, and the way he talks
is.
about he and the universe from nothing doesn't make sense, because nothing is still something.
Right, and that's what he says that in the book, and
I've read it. Like I said, I'm just not a fan. The way he comes off takes away from anything that he's ever done, in my opinion.
Nice. Nice. Bless you, by the way.
I'm more of a, if I had to
Thank
go
you.
that route, I'm more of a Sean Carroll fan because it seems like he's a
I
little bit more open-minded, but
I
still,
love Sean. I love
yeah.
Sean Carroll. Yes, definitely. And I tell you, and it's funny that you mentioned that. I was going to be nicer to Lawrence Krauss than you're willing to, but I I can
Beat
listen
him
to
up.
him. I can listen to that guy, but I tell you, he's one of the few guys that I can listen to and I can follow his logic. But his book, I really could not follow
Hmm.
completely his book, and I only brought it up simply because there is a theory in theoretical physics, the idea that emptiness ha- does seem to have the nature of producing what we call sometimes virtual particles. That there are particles popping in and out of existence all the time. That there is something about the nature. There is no such thing as true emptiness. There is really no such thing as empty space, even though we use those ideas. Even in a vacuum, they are finding that there are particles popping in and out of existence constantly. And his theory, at least, I think essentially what he was saying is that there is something about the nature of emptiness that does seem to manifest energy on some primal level. And I find that fascinating because, again, the saints, the monks, the medicine men, the shaman for thousands and thousands of years have essentially been saying the same thing. So I think we shouldn't ignore that.
Well, I was going to say, even Democritus, who came up with the idea of an atom or some tiny particle,
Right.
he was a big fan, and his teacher Leucippus, the idea of the void, that's part of it. But
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's 400 BC. We're talking. I mean, that's ancient Greek, pre-Socratic philosophy. But I guess I don't hate, like Lauren. I just think that if you're going to go on talk shows and you're going to get people interested in this kind of stuff, the worst thing you can do is start off by, separating half the people by saying they're dumb for believing in anything, you
Right.
know, f- magical or however you want to say metaphysical or whatever. But that's actually what he's talking about. Like something popping into existence from nothing. If that's not magic,
Yep.
I don't know what is. So
And that's the thing, isn't it?
Right.
It is
It
magic.
all
I
boils
almost
down to some crazy thing.
Yeah, it is almost like when I read, and I've had to read, there's a lot of quantum physics in my book. I've had to study all the layman's guides to quantum physics to get this, because the books, Tripping the Field, it is essentially science fiction. It's a lot of philosophy. It's a lot of thinking and whatnot. It's kind of an action book in many ways as well, but there's a lot of science, and I had to get the science right. So everything that I've studied from quantum physics, that what you said hits it on the mark. It sounds to me like, it's like at some point science has come along and discovered magic, because what they've discovered,
Right.
what is happening at the particle level, truly it meets all the definitions of what we've traditionally referred to as magic. It makes no sense whatsoever. And but once you slap a name onto it and say, well, it's we're going to call it particle entanglement, or we're going to call it the observation effect, and they've got all these nice terms, and it's like it sounds like it's compartmentalized and understood when it's anything but understood. So yeah,
Well,
fascinating
if you
stuff.
approach if you approach a kid and you go, "Yeah, what's dreams?" They would think that the adults knew the definition the way that they, talk about it. You talk to doctors that are so hardcore about the answer when they really just don't know. So you got
That's
to
how
take it
we
with
get
a
caught
grain
up
of
in
salt.
language. Yeah, that's how we get caught up in language, though, isn't it? That we use these terms, and then we go, oh, we have this idea that we know what it is. It's like the kid looks up at the sky in total wonder and looks at some feathered beast, and asks their father, well, what is that? Well, it's a bird. So what? It's just a bird. Immediately
Yeah.
you've crushed that kid's imagination and awe, and it's a shame, because that father has, that answer specifically, it's not an answer. You don't Just because you have a name for it doesn't mean you understand what that thing is. And that's the same for every process. Does not mean that we have understood it by any stretch of the imagination.
yeah, I mean, I guess that's the thing with all these scientists too, right? Is
Right.
they're open-minded to like new theories as long as it's, physical materialism, right? So like even Sean Carroll, will say, when he's on Joe Rogan and stuff, they'll be like, oh yeah, they're popping in and out, and it's the observer effect and all this stuff, and we don't really understand it. But then all of a sudden, he's like, "But there is some explanation. We just don't know what it is yet." So if you don't
That's
know,
exactly what I thought he said right on Joe Rogan the last time
yeah,
he was on.
if you don't know what it is, then you don't know what
Right.
it is. You can't say
Right.
that it's some physical law that we can eventually figure out. We may never figure out. And actually, from doing this podcast and looking for truth and studying all these fringe topics and things that people would consider pseudoscience and stuff, I do think there is. It's narrowed down from me doing research and reading books and doing all this stuff, but there is this narrow field of fringe that I believe there is truth in. And I don't know how science can. I feel like science is at a snail's pace crawl now because they're limiting themselves to these physical observations as opposed to looking at the fringe and pushing their mindsets and pushing, we were just talking about the ancient Greeks. The ancient Greeks were talking about metaphysical things that we're now starting to prove way back, BC. So it's like I just would like a little bit more of like outside the box thinking. So when I do see a scientist doing that, I applaud them because I'm like, this guy's pushing the boundaries, and
Right.
it may be fruitful and maybe it won't be fruitful for a couple hundred years, but just to have these thoughts, I just feel like we're still on these recycled things that were being talked about thousands of years ago.
There always seem there. It does seem like that, doesn't it? That the science is always going to be hundreds, if not thousands, of years behind those who can have direct experience. And I think that's the thing. Science is always going to be limited because their job, I would say, as a scientist, is to look at everything from an objective position. To stand apart from the situation and say, all right, here's this thing happening. Can I replicate it? Can I reproduce that effect? And don't get me wrong, I love science. I have
I do
nothing
too.
but
Yeah, me
I
too.
have respect, absolutely respect for it, but it is limited, like you're saying, because you never get to the personal experience. And one of the reasons I didn't, I've had a lot of people ask me, well, why didn't you just write, like an autobiography instead of writing fiction? I've created this book, and I've had a lot of people interview me, and they're like, well, geez, you've got all these crazy stories about these things that have happened to you. And my attitude is that because it comes down to the personal experience, it doesn't matter what kind of crazy stories I have. I can rattle off crazy things that have happened to me all day long, but I'm never going to get somebody else to having a personal experience. Like, you're not going to have these things proven to yourself until it's happened to you. And so my focus is in getting people into the real mindset. I wanted to write a book, at least, that kind of submerged you into this thinking. It submerged you into this worldview so that you start thinking along these lines. And my whole thing is, don't believe me. I don't want you to believe me. Don't believe my experience. And I have lots of people like, well, can you prove that astral projection is a real thing? I'm like, no. And I wouldn't be interested in it if I could. Even if I could create a believer, I don't know. I have no use for a believer,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense. Like, I'm more interested in experiencers is what we need. We need more people to experience this, and that's where that's my real focus, and is in hey, this is what you do, and there are steps, there are things that you can do to induce these states of consciousness. Or you could just smoke a bunch of DMT and
That's what I was actually going to ask you. Do you think it's a lazy approach to just, smoke some DMT to get there?
uh um
I
it
don't.
is it's
I don't think
it's
it's
trial by
lazy.
fire.
Yeah, I don't think it's
Trial by
lazy.
fire. It is trial by fire. It's fast. It is definitely fast, but you're also only going to the things that are going to stick for you in a DMT experience are still only going to be those things that you're ready to understand and accept. I mean, it's not like all of a sudden you smoke DMT and you're the Buddha and you're enlightened, and it's not like that. although,
Yeah, just go on the internet. There's proof of that. Like these people that claim to ego dissolve, and then you hear them fighting with people over the dumbest shit. It's like, but
Oh, you didn't learn.
but I think
hashtag woke. I'm sick of it.
do you think though? My thing about psychedelics and the most interesting thing about it is with all of these things, whether it's lucid dreaming, whether it's meditation, all these things take focus and practice and everything. And the interesting thing about psychedelics is you can just take this medicine, this plant, this compound, whatever, and you're in it, and you can't get out of it until it's done doing its thing. So it's almost like this living thing that's forcing you into this situation, and you're there and you're walking around. See, that's the thing. We're talking about waking life and waking, asking yourself, am I awake, and that kind of stuff.
Yes.
When you're doing psychedelics, you are awake, you are conscious, you're not in this sleeping state or whatever, so you're able to walk around and ponder things.
There's no confusion, you go, oh, I could have been dreaming this, you're fully awake, and
exactly.
It's no joke. But not that the dreaming's a joke or anything, it's just easier to pawn off to that.
You brought up a good point, because I tell you, the thing about my experiences with my lucid dreaming, my rational mind was able to always go back and snap itself back into place later and go, yeah, but I was asleep, I was dreaming, so what does that really mean? But even in the case of psychedelics, oh yeah, well, I was on a powerful psychedelic, and so if you want to make up an excuse later, that to me that's the trick, that you might be able to have these insane experiences with DMT, but your narrative that I keep coming back to, it's going to snap back into place eventually. Your ego is going to come back, and you may be able to set it aside temporarily and have this amazing experience, but then later, depending on where your actual experience and skill level is, to me, that's where meditation comes in. The meditation is what really helps concrete those experiences where you don't go back into the rationalization as much, going, well, yeah, but did I really experience that? What really happened? I mean, I've had a lot of weird experiences in my life now, and now I've had enough experiences where there are experiences that I can't rationalize anymore. It's like I've reached the end of my ability to rationalize. I've now seen a couple of UFOs. We can talk about that. It's kind of interesting. But it's not really my focus. But and I've had plenty of the astral projection things. And like I said, the things that started really breaking me were the things where I was able to prove to myself, hey mom, where were you at 6 o'clock in the morning? Describe exactly what you were doing. And then she described to me precisely the situation or what somebody was literally watching on television.
Well, let me ask you,
miles away.
Do you think though that that's your mind, like you said, understanding who these people are, knowing their habits, have you thought about that aspect of it, that it might just be a projection of that, their habits so well that, and I'm not trying to be skeptical, I'm just asking.
No.
Yeah.
You should be skeptical.
Well, how detailed have you got? That's the question.
Don't ever apologize for being skeptical. That is exactly where my head went, and all I can tell you is that yes, that's the first thing that I would say that my ego tried to do and say, aha, but I do know those people well, and maybe I've just pieced enough together from their habits and what they might be wearing and the things that they watch on television. And all I can say is that when you get down to the actual all of the specific details of, hey mom, I saw you drop that frying pan out of that cupboard, when you get down to those kind of things, after a while, things like coincidence start to break down after a while. I mean, I think it's appropriate after a while to say, all right, my rationalizations aren't making sense now. And I had to honor that. I had to honor that eventually and say, all right, I've got enough experiences now where I've seen firsthand of what's going on in other places. And, this isn't making sense. But beyond that, I've also had experiences that absolutely defied reality in general. Things that broke me at a level that just absolutely didn't make sense. And those were the situations where I started experiencing what's called bilocation. Bilocation is when you are actually in two places at once. So I've had astral projections where I've been in two places at the exact same time. And all I can tell you is that when that happens, your rationalization just shuts down because there is no explanation for it. In fact, I would say that even as I'm describing it to you, your rational mind on some level is possibly picturing a split screen sort of situation, like, oh, so you saw one thing here and another thing over here, or you saw maybe an overlap of two different views of being in two places at the same time. Your mind, it's because your mind can't really negotiate that. That's not the way our brains are built. But for me, my personal experience is that no, I've literally been in two fully realized places at the exact same time. We're not talking a split screen. We're not talking a dual vision or an overlap of like information. We're talking somehow two completely realized realities of being in two places simultaneously. And that, even when I say it, it sounds ludicrous. It makes no sense. And so all I can tell you is that, yeah, I've got those experiences now where when I think about that stuff, my brain immediately just shuts off and goes, okay, there's things going on out there that I don't understand. So
yeah, that's crazy.
So you bring up the UFO thing. Now,
Yeah.
I personally, we've talked about UFOs many times, obviously, with all the recent buzz in the news and the different small factions that are pushing for different things. Now, there's more evidence than ever of nuts and bolts physical UFOs, but
Yeah.
my philosophy has always been I think it's a consciousness-based phenomenon, meaning,
Okay.
like look at like a camera. If you took a picture of a UFO, that's probably why there's not that many pictures of UFOs. But the way that we take in photons into our optical nerve, it gets sent upside down into our brain processes it. We might be, based on our senses, pick up more of the spectrum of what's going on than, let's say, a camera or some sort of, infrared or whatever. But my question is pertaining to the lucid dreaming aspect. I've never seen a UFO in terms of a physical UFO. Like, we've been camping many times. I've been in the woods, nighttime, but walking around, that kind of stuff. Never seen anything. However, lucid dreaming wise, in meditation, I've seen a few of them. Where it's just like me laying in the desert on the ground, and then there's a UFO hovering to my left, like that kind of stuff. And yes, it could just be part of the lucid dreaming process. But my question to you is, what do you think's going on with that? Do you think it is connected, or do you think it's something that is just your brain? I was thinking about it that day, or something along those lines.
First and foremost, I'm going to tell you that I don't know. I don't know. But I will tell you that I like what you're saying. I like that idea, and I do think that you're onto something. But again, that's not really my area. I'll tell you this: a psychic, whatever that means, a psychic told me that I was going to start seeing UFOs about 5 years before I had my first experience. But the experience I had was about 8 years ago, and that was here just outside of Boulder, Colorado. I was in my car, and what I saw fly over my car, I know my physics, and this physically made no sense what this object did. Now, when I say it makes no sense, at least in terms of our classical understanding of Newtonian physics. All right. So if there is something, if our government has got something that's able to move outside of those parameters, first of all, to hell with them for not sharing that. That's my first attitude. It angers me, honestly. If that's really the case, some of these guys that like Rogan has had on who have apparently worked for Area 51, if that's honestly the case, I think that's what pisses me off the most. I just have to get that out of the way first to say that if people are sitting on this kind of information, that you've got, gravity propulsion engines, F you is my attitude, because that's...
we're wrecking the earth with these fumes.
Well, yeah, and it's just that the science that they are withholding is yeah, that's unacceptable.
Well,
I would
that's why
say that's
scientists
very
don't.
upsetting.
I think that's why these physicists and theoretical physicists, and yeah, some of them entertain the idea of life out there somewhere, but I think
Yeah,
that's why most of them don't believe that we've been visited before or are currently being visited, is because these things defy their knowledge. I'm not even going to say it defies what we, physics or physical laws, other than just the fact that it defies what we know about the technology that we have. So
right. And
it's
maybe
it's almost an ego thing on their end of things, though, to believe that what they know is the top of the game, end all be all, and if they don't
right.
know it, nothing else exists beyond that, which I think is kind of naive, considering there have been a lot of weird things. Operation Paperclip. We took a lot of
Yep.
of the scientists from Germany after World War II. A lot of them
Yep.
had way more advanced knowledge of propulsion and rocket science than we currently had at the time. So, like I said, I think it's naive to think that
It is.
there's not at least some advanced technology out there that is capable of more than they're putting onto. Now, that being said,
Absolutely.
with these things have been seen since, we don't really buy into the ancient alien thing, but these things have been seen in antiquity,
Who
and
knows?
yeah, and weird things at least. So whether they were
Yeah.
UFOs or
Those
something,
paintings are pretty suspicious with the guy staring at the sky and pointing and stuff, you know?
They are
It's
strange. I don't know what to think of it
crazy.
either. Yeah,
um,
I don't know.
but yeah, in terms of what's going on there too, it just baffles. I mean, I find it fascinating, and I constantly keeping up with what's going on. But there again, you have like the psychedelic community. You have a bunch of people that have their ideas and theories, and they'll fight about it and bicker about it. It's just like, let this thing play out. Do your best. If you're interested, do some research. Put your best foot forward, and that's it.
Yeah.
If you want to have a healthy debate or a dialogue about it, do it. But I'm sick of seeing all these people online just fight about like the dumbest shit for no reason. It's just like, we could be so much further if there was just more of a open discussion, and just I miss the days of people being able to agree to disagree, or look at somebody else's point of view and maybe not agree with it, but respect where they're coming from, kind of a thing.
Yeah, we there's not much humility, it seems like, anymore. It's like there's something about that we've lost that along our dialogue, especially on the internet and on social media, So for me, like when there's a topic that I don't know about, I'm the first one to go, I don't know. And I wish more people would do that. When you don't know about something, just go, I don't know.
Right.
It's okay. It's okay. In fact, to me, that's where real insight and real curiosity is born, when you go, I don't freaking know what's going on. But I want to address something where we started with this conversation. You asked about the connection to consciousness.
Right.
And the reason that's interesting to me is because, well, another strange thing is that I've had a lot of family members now who have had UFO experiences. I had uncles who saw apparently a very well documented UFO sighting outside of Chicago. This is back in, like, I think it was like the 70s. I'd
Yeah.
have to check with them, but I mean, this was in the papers and whatnot. But two of my uncles saw this. They were not just on acid or something and seeing stuff in the sky, which is what I think a lot of people think have happened. Then I had a UFO experience, like I said, about 8 years ago. That, like I said, this object did, the way it moved is kind of similar to the video that they have now from that one pilot that's getting a lot of press right
Yeah,
now.
A-tip.
That happened. Right, that what they call the Tic Tac or whatever.
Tic
I
Tac, yeah.
I don't know what this thing was. I did not see the shape of it. I saw lights for the most part. The lights were nothing out of the ordinary, but what this thing did in terms of movement, this thing could propel itself from one part of the sky to the other on a dime and stop, and then redirect itself at a right angle without any sort of blowback, and that's not the way, force equals mass times acceleration works. That's not the way our understanding of physics works. So that was one of those things that kind of blew my head. And I felt that the strange thing about it is that I almost felt that when this experience happened, that it was somehow for me. I don't know what that means, but I almost felt that it was intended for me on some level. And I almost felt that, I was not, it happened so fast, I was not able to pull my phone up or my camera. And I have a feeling I wouldn't have really caught much if I did. And so there is this weird thing that's perhaps connected to consciousness somehow. I don't know what that feeling is, but then I tell this story to my father. My dad is his background is mechanical engineering, and he is very much a, part A fits into part B. He's and so he had an experience now. Now that was about, I think, 3 years ago, and this was outside of his home, outside of Chicago, Illinois.
Yeah,
as well.
that's where I'm at. And actually, I
Yeah,
think there's a really famous sighting right outside O'Hare. I don't know how long ago, but I think it was maybe the 90s. But I don't know. I'd have to check. Early 2000s. But
nice.
yeah, it must be some sort of hotbed, and there's a lot of weird paranormal stuff that happens in Chicago too. I don't know if I don't buy into some of it, but there's been like a recent uptake in the last 5-10 years of like Mothman sightings outside of
Yeah,
Chicago.
yeah,
There's a
yeah.
lot of like channeled stuff that happens in Chicago. So like there's a lot of weird woo woo. I know you're not into it, but there's a lot of woo woo things that happen around Chicago. And
They have a lot in New Jersey too. Maybe it's the big cities or something.
Right? Yeah, maybe it is. I don't know, but the thing about my father's experience is that it very much disturbed him. One, he also had that classical. He got burned on the side of his.
we're back. So Ian, you were talking about your
Talking about his
dad's,
father.
yeah,
Yes.
your dad's burns and his incident.
So what he saw, I mean, the way he described it, he said what this thing did. Sounded like a very different object than what I saw, but it's so strange that first of all, I saw this strange thing that I never knew what to think about the UFO sightings until you see something yourself that absolutely does not make sense. And then he saw this thing, and all I can say is that, yeah, both of our conclusions were somehow it's like it was meant for us. And again, I don't know what that means. I couldn't tell you. I wish I knew. I wish I understood. My father's sensation was that somehow he was watching something that peered out from another universe, like it sort of blipped in from another alternate reality and just sort of said hi and
Hmm.
then went back, and that was my feeling of what I saw too. It was like this thing came in just to like mess with my head and then said, "Okay, I'm gonna fly over your car and vanish now, and you're just gonna be left, to deal with that."
Hmm.
And what was funny is that I found myself very quickly in that same position that other UFO people are in, where I now have this story where I'm telling people, and they're looking at me going, "Oh yeah, so what were you smoking? Like what was
Hmm.
going on? Or, and you're full of crap, right?" And I'm like, "Oh, now I'm the crazy one. That's how that works." So I have a deeper appreciation now for people who have had not just UFO sightings, but I would say any experience where that just breaks your brain and you go, whatever it is that I saw does not fit into the normal category of reality. And that is something that sticks with you. Those are the things that stick with you. Those are the things that you can't rationalize away. It's the things that you go, all right, uh, the world doesn't work the way I thought it did. And that's it. So that in and of itself is why I think my experience was important. I don't think I have any like I'm telling you, I don't have any other insight about UFOs, but that in and of itself, that's what it did to me. That now I've got that other thing, in my book now, or another thing in my experience that just doesn't make sense. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting, and too, the other thing is the human brain and the human mind is very flawed when it comes to memories. I mean, it's been proven before.
Yes.
However, do you
Yeah.
think that these experiences, like you said, they sit with you? Do you think that it's different in the sense that if you just saw like a light and it wasn't that profound in the sky, you're like, oh, that's weird. That you might say, oh yeah, I've seen a UFO. But the experience that you
Right.
had is so profound that you are more likely to remember the details or remember it accurately, as opposed, since it did have an effect on you, like let's say a crazy dream, how that might stay with you, and most dreams just vanish once you wake up, that kind of a thing.
Right. Yeah, there is, and there is something about astral projection and lucid dreams. They're still not sure why your memory seems to categorize it the way it does. You remember people seem to have a much better recall of their lucid dreams, even if it's 20 years ago or something like that. And that's certainly the case for me. I can remember exact details from my lucid dreams that have happened years and years ago, as opposed to perhaps the dreams I just had last night that I only right now barely have any, recognition
Mm-hmm.
of what exactly happened. But uh, yeah, so how does it is a different experience as far as, yeah, when you just like, oh, well, maybe I just saw lights in the sky or something. I can tell you that when this happened, first of all, uh, in this vicinity of this area that I saw this object at, there is a small airport. All right, and also DIA, Denver International, was in the other direction. So seeing lights in and of itself was not an uncommon thing. I mean that's not what stood out for me. Like, oh, how strange! I'm seeing moving lights in the sky. It's like, I've got two airports in this area. That's not, So this thing, it wasn't until this thing made itself known that it was doing something very different, that I really started paying attention. And I can remember that experience as clear as if it happened last night. I mean, it is like concreted in my memory, is all I can say. And I can tell you that when this thing was doing these maneuvers, I could feel my brain kind of flipping through, its card catalog or its reference, going, what does this? What does this? Nothing does this. And I
Mm-hmm.
kept on coming up with nothing. And that in and of itself was driving me a little bit mad. I'm like, wait, this thing just spun on a dime and it shot to the other side. And then and it just kept on doing these things that made no sense. And I'm sitting there going, what object does this? Nothing can, and that to me is what is the gift, I guess, that I was left with from that particular experience. But what it all means, man, I don't know. I think it's fascinating.
What's with all
I
the weird
I don't know.
symbolism at the DIA, the Denver airport? You know what I'm saying? I mean, there's a lot of like,
Yeah, I know, man.
there's a lot of weird
Yeah.
people that get crazy with it, but there is weird things there that aren't at other airports. What do you think's going on with that?
Oh man, you're getting into conspiracy stuff now. And again, I'm going to tell you that I don't know, but I know that horse, man, that horse has killed like two or three people now.
That's,
I
yeah. Didn't
have
it kill
no
the guy
idea.
that sculpted
It
it?
killed
Or
the guy. It killed the guy who sculpted it. And I think it killed somebody else. Again, I don't. I'd have to look it up. I don't remember what happened. But
that's
have you seen the horse? Have you seen that thing?
I've
It's
seen
I,
I've
horrible.
seen
I
pictures of
just
it.
was
I've
there like
yeah,
a few
uh,
months ago.
yeah. Maurice
Oh
has been
God.
there.
It's just hideous. I mean, it's just like, and anatomically correct. I mean, the whole thing, glowing red eyes. It's crazy. But then I know you're also talking about all the ideas of what is possibly, the strange paintings and the things that
Well,
they
there's just
say
so
are.
like a lot of like symbolism there that like it's just
Oh,
what's the point of that being? Like I've been in many airports, I've never seen anything weird like that. So why there? And there's
I
different weird theories, and we're not. We don't do that kind of stuff on the show either. We
yeah, yeah,
we try and keep it science based and somewhat.
sure, sure.
Even if it's a fringe topic, we try and look at the validity to those things. But yeah, it's just
Have to.
it is a weird thing though that if you've anybody that's looked into it, just take a look at it and see what you think about it. But it's lots of weird symbolism there for sure. But that goes back to even ancient times. There's a lot of temples and stuff that has symbolism that doesn't really make sense. But when you talk about lucid dreaming in terms of, what are some tips that you might have for people
Oh yeah.
that want to get into it, that maybe they're familiar with it and they want to try it, but they've never been able to do it, or maybe they're able to do it once in a while, but they don't know how to get there? Like, what would your advice be?
My advice comes down to first and foremost the most simplistic it sounds, well, I should say it sounds like the most simplistic task ever. But if you can do this task, then uh, then you're ready to move on. You should contact me. You should go to my website and dig me up if you're able to do this. And this is the thing. If whenever you even suspect that you are in a dream state for any reason, so whatever, this, you can do this during the day. That's what some people do. They call them reality checks. But whenever you even have the slightest suspicion that something is off, take your dominant hand, for me it's my right hand, and you put it up in front of your face and you stare at it. That's it. And I'm saying hold your attention to your hand. That's all you have to do. I mean, I can't make it any simpler than that. If you are in a dream state, there is a strange universal quality to lucid dreams that when you stare at anything for a long period of time, actually it only takes a few moments in my case, when you stare at any object, it will shapeshift. I have theories on why this is, but this seems to be a universal quality. And the reason I say use your hand is because our hands are our primary instruments that we use to manipulate the world. They are always there in some form in your dreams. So find your hand, stare at it, simply just stare at it. And what will happen is that if you were in a dream state, it will shift. It will turn invisible. It will change colors. I've had my fingers turn into twisty straws. I've had more fingers than I'm supposed to have. And then what happens is that you know your hands intimately. It, like I said, it is we have an intimate relationship with our hands, with the way we communicate and deal with the world. So when we see them shift, it sends a very deep message to the rest of our conscious selves that I am now in a altered state of reality. And then there's techniques to move on past that. But I don't even like to talk about what to do past that, because what I've just said, what I've just suggested might take you months or years to accomplish. For me, I was lucky. Like I said, I was able to, as soon as I read about this technique, and again, this is not my idea. This is out of a series of books from Carlos Castaneda, books on shamanism that were written back in the 1970s. I did not invent this technique, but it's such a beautifully simplistic technique. You think you're dreaming, put your hand in front of your face and stare at it. That's all you got to do. If you can get to that point, then you're ready to move on to something else. But what will happen, like I said, that shape shifting of your hand, it's going to affect you, and that experience is undeniable, because then you know without a shadow of a doubt, all right, now I'm dreaming. Now it's playtime. Now you can start moving on from there. And so that's what I recommend to everyone. If you can get to that point, just bring your hand up in front of your face and stare at it. That's it. And like I said, if you get to that point, contact me. Let's go from there. Let's move on from there, because then you're ready for some more information perhaps. But that's the first step, I would say.
What about these regimens? Like Maurice was mentioning, we had our buddy Chris Emerson on, who he's a musician, but he studies Vedanta and does yoga and all that stuff. He was on some regimen where he wakes up like every 3 hours and asks himself if he's awake, and then goes back into it. Do you think that have you heard of that? Because I've actually heard of it from other places too. A lot of like Eastern philosophy and techniques and stuff like that. What do you think about that stuff?
I think they're fantastic. I think that if the trick about any of them is that you have to stick with it. Now, again, like I said, I was lucky. These things came to me spontaneously. I did not have to pick up techniques. In fact, when I did try to use techniques to instigate lucid dreams, I was generally failing with them for some reason. That's my experience, but I have I've communicated with so many hundreds of people on this topic. I would absolutely support that idea 100%, but I would say first and foremost, this is not like, I have so many people come to us on some of these lucid dreaming boards that I'm connected to on Facebook and whatnot, where they think this is like, oh, I want to pick up skiing. I want to try that. It's not as simple as that. It's not just like a thing that you're going to try. This is something that you really have to kind of be deeply dedicated to. This is something you have to want heart and soul. I mean, it's like you really have to want this thing. I've even had people come to me and say, well, I really want to try this astral projection because I want to spy on my boyfriend to see what he's doing, and I'm like, if that's the full extent of your intention of getting involved in this, I think that you're going to be unsuccessful, is my guess.
Well, let me ask you this though, because for me it was completely different.
Okay.
Like I said, I started to meditate. I'm on this path of what I would say is a search for truth or enlightenment or some a semblance of that, from reading and research and doing this podcast and talking to different people. But I have been doing lucid dreaming before that and just didn't know. So like I said, it's this thing where I'll start dreaming apparently in the middle of the night and I'll wake up and have to go to the bathroom. And then I know, okay, I'm awake. Okay.
Nice.
So then I jump back into bed and go to bed for another couple hours or whatever. And when I do that, I can either jump back into the dream I was just having, or I start a new dream, or it's like a spin-off dream of the dream before. And like I said, it's always my mind, my consciousness. It's me, but it's in this altered state, if you will. I didn't push for it to happen. I wasn't like, oh, I'm going to keep doing this or figure this out. So I guess my question is, do you think it's possible, like you said, I know you're saying that it takes practice and focus and all that stuff, but do you think that people that already meditate or people that are on these paths or understanding or are familiar with these topics might already be doing these things and just not aware of them?
They may be touching on lucid dreaming in a lot of ways. I mean, lucid dreaming is in many ways a spectrum until you get to the kind of point where I'm talking about, where you are fully conscious and staring at something and going, I'm gonna stare at my hand until something happens and it shapeshifts. All I can tell you is that once something like that happens, then it takes on a whole new dynamic. You're brought onto a brand new level. But there's also lower levels of lucid dreaming where, I've had a lot of dreams, and it sounds like maybe you have had too, where you have this idea that it's a suspicion, like, I think none of this is real, and I think that I really have control over this situation, right?
Yeah.
But we could call that a low level of lucid dreaming, but I would say you're not truly fully conscious until you have dropped the storyline completely. And what I mean by that is that I've had low-level lucid dreams where I'm telling myself, oh yeah, I kind of have some degree of fluidity, I'm kind of conscious, but darn it, that giant alien is still chasing me and I still have to run from it.
Yeah, see, I don't have that.
Okay.
I know what you're saying, but I don't have that specifically. I'll try and explain it as clear as I can, what's going on when I lucid dream. When I'm in the dream, I'm playing out things that maybe my subconscious picked up that day, something that happened to me. But in the dream, I know that I'm dreaming, but I'm still participating in the dream, if that makes sense.
And that's exactly what I'm saying. You're still participating in
but
it.
But
So
it's willfully. I could wake up and say, "Am I awake?" I could do that, but for some reason, I want to stay in there to play that scenario out, if that makes sense.
So perhaps that sounds like you are right there, is what it sounds like. It sounds like my suggestion to you is, if you really are, I mean, consciousness is a weird thing. It suggests levels of freedom that aren't always there. So I can't tell you exactly. You're not going to know for yourself until you lift your hand in front of your face in one of these dreams. That's all I can suggest. Bring your hand up in front of your face and stare at it.
Okay.
And do that. And if you can do that, you tell me what happens. And that to me, I think that's going to it's going to kick it up a notch.
Okay.
So to speak. That's my suggestion. But it sounds like you've got all the right ingredients. It sounds like you're able to enter these realms with a high degree of consciousness. And yeah, I mean, you're on the right path. You're absolutely there. But then let's get it there 100% is all I'm saying. Let's 100% be fully make sure that you can disengage 100% from that scenario. That I know you're telling me like, yeah, well, I kind of want to play
Right.
this out. All I'm saying is do a test. Make sure that you 100% are conscious and aware, and that you have your individuality and you are a liberated consciousness in that realm. Stare at your hand.
Yeah.
Is the best thing I can tell you.
Yeah, I'll try that out for sure. And actually, there's other
But
times too where it's like, you know that it's a dream, and then you wake up and you're like, I'm glad that that was a dream because that was
yeah,
some
oh
messed
yeah,
up
Oh
shit.
yeah.
Um,
right.
but Maurice was talking about what about like, did you ever look into like Rudolf Steiner's like philosophy or his research on the dreams and interpretations and different things?
Does not sound familiar. No,
Okay.
no, I'm not familiar with him.
He's
So,
like
but
a theosophist, turn of the century kind of a guy. He started off as a physical scientist in I think Austria, and
okay,
then kind of got away from the area when the wars and everything was happening. But he started. I don't know if you are familiar with the Waldorf schools. He
yes,
that,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
all
yeah.
that's
I've
all
heard of that.
predicated on his philosophy and his work and his ideas and stuff like that. But
Huh. Okay.
yes, you should check him out because he
Pretty
has
interesting. You'll like it.
he has
All right.
weird theories on dreams and altered states of consciousness, and he was big on like epistemology and ontology and that kind of stuff. So
Sounds like that's right up my alley. Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, this has been super fascinating. Is there anything else you want to touch on before we wrap it up here?
Go buy my book.
Yeah.
That's
Oh
all I
yeah.
can tell you. No,
So
Look
it,
it up.
we have the
yeah,
link below. So anybody that's interested, you can go on to the
nice,
Amazon and order it. But you also have a
cool.
website too. What's your website?
It's my name, ianjaydid.com. Simple as that. And I'm an artist, I'm a cartoonist, and so I kind of created. It's called Iboga Moon Productions.
Oh wow.
It's my production company that I just housed all of my projects under one roof. And so when you go to ianjaydid.com, you can find my artwork, you can find the books I'm working on, you can find my cartooning. You can that kind of links you to, and I have a calendar of events on there explaining who I'm, where I'm doing book signings or where I'm doing interviews next, yada yada yada. So yeah, that's kind of the main hub. But yeah, Tripping the Field is available worldwide. You can find it on Barnes and Noble, Amazon, wherever. You can find it directly through my publisher, Glad Eye Press. We always appreciate that. I think Bezos has enough money, in my opinion. I think the guy's doing okay. So let's not give him any more money. Go
Apparently,
go
he's got to
go.
recuperate after that divorce. He lost a good
Ah,
chunk of it.
I don't care.
I'm just joking. I yeah. No.
what's
He's gonna be
half of
fine.
everything?
Even if even
Right.
if he even if he had
Exactly. Right.
10 mil, we would still be saying the same thing, right?
Right.
So
Well, guys, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. That's being curious is, man, I love to talk to curious people, and that to me. If you're
Cool.
curious, man, that's all you need, man. That's
yeah,
everything's
thanks.
gonna
We'll
fall
get
into
you. We'll
place.
get you back on because sounds like you got a well of knowledge. We got to tap into some more. I
I
mean, I'm sure we could elaborate on some of these stories and make those full episodes themselves. So
I would love to talk more. Sure, yeah, whatever, guys.
Yeah,
I'd be,
shout
I'd be
out
open to it.
to Tail Eaters too on the
Yeah,
group on
tail eaters.
Facebook that's run by our buddy Lee Adams, who we've had on the show many times, and
I talk to him every once in a while. Yeah, Lee and
yeah,
I just kind of got connected just about a couple of months ago or so. I started kind of looking into what he's doing. So yeah, I'm a member of Tail Leaders and yeah, a few other sites out there. So I'm not hard to find. You can find me anywhere.
yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for coming on, man, and we'll add
all
the
right.
link to your website below. We've got your book, and people check that out. Also, check out the links to all of our stuff. I'm not going to go over it; takes too long. So, peace, everybody.
Take care. Bye bye.